Hey guys, and welcome back to Europe in Detail, or more specifically, Gottsburg. Yeah, that's right, the city has a name now, or the town has a name, which is pretty cool, and the only criteria for this name was it had to be easy to pronounce. So, Gottsburg it is. I didn't want it to sound like I was choking on my tongue while I was trying to pronounce the name of the town or anything, so it is very, very simple. So, anyway, in this episode, I had some time off work, so I decided to build a large portion of the town sort of all at once. So we focus on the hill behind this little flat part of the town. At least in the beginning of the episode, that's where we focus, and we install some pedestrian paths as well, and you will also see the architecture start to transition here into slightly more modern buildings, but there's also some really cool pockets of medieval type buildings still here and there. Now, it took me hours to put all these buildings and stuff and put all the roads in on this hill, so I've just done a quick time lapse for you guys so you can see the gist of what we do before we move down and detail it. So the roads get installed first, and then the pedestrian paths in key areas also get put in. Then I place a whole heap of buildings before we move down and keep the detailing mainly around the pedestrian paths to begin with. So what I've done here with the pedestrian paths is, rather than using the vanilla one and turning it invisible like I normally would, I'm using a very narrow, I think it's a 2-meter concrete path, and then actually bringing the stairs just slightly over it so that I don't have to turn it invisible. The reason for this is the invisible path is 4 meters wide, and I want to make these stairs narrow. And seeing as these stairways are going to actually be used by the citizens, I want them walking up the stairs. I don't want them clipping through walls. They still do a little bit, but this is far more accurate than using that invisible path. And as you can see here, the method was to have the path installed to begin with, and then install everything around the path, because it's far too tedious trying to get your path into what you've created the other way round. So I think there's about 3 or 4 of these different stairways all up, and you'll just see me now go through and create different ones, and I'm using the same method of building with the paths already been installed, but I'm trying to make each stairway a little bit more individual than the last one. Like this next stairway here, for instance, has a modern elevator installed that takes you about 2/3 of the way up, and then you can use the surrounding shops to get up to the street level from there. And this next bit that we move on to here, I'm trying to make like a sloped vineyard sort of thing, and I'm reasonably happy with this, but thinking now I've got a much better idea for this. I'm going to go back and turn this into like an old cemetery, and this was again just out of the name of variety. I wanted to do something different here, and even though it looked pretty cool as a vineyard or a whatever, orchard, and it made sense because it was facing towards the sun, I think a cemetery will look much, much better, so we'll look to revisit this in future at some point. So the rest of the area gets detailed much the same as I've been doing with the rest of the town. I use the big blocks to make the retaining walls and then detail from there. And aside from the pedestrian paths and the detailing around them, I've kept this whole hillside pretty simple. I want to make all of these buildings look like they're supposed to be there, so they have all these retaining walls and stuff, but in terms of like street level detailing, there's very little in this part of the town, and that's mainly because you hardly ever see the streets. Obviously we're going to see the side of the hill in pretty much every shot, so it has to make sense looking at it from that perspective with the retaining walls and things like that. But it's not very often we're actually going to see inside the streets here. They're so narrow, and these buildings are quite a lot taller than the ones we were putting in the first couple of episodes. And I guess saving on the props here is just going to mean we can, have it more heavily detailed in other areas. So the last section of this to be built is this retaining wall, and I'm pretty sure this was one of Revo's retaining walls, and it just looks awesome. It's got great texture on it, and it looks very realistic, and I sort of wanted to make this look like it was twirling around like an old road came down here. And I was really pleased with how this came out actually, and I've decided I'm going to do a few more areas in the city like this, and actually this gave me a really, really good idea for an episode. So with that is this part of the build complete. So I was buzzing around on the Steam workshop looking for different things the other day, and I found this really cool looking modern sort of town square. It's almost like a big decal, and I've never seen this before, and I've spent hours on the workshop, and it's because it's a Chinese asset, and there's so many good Chinese creators on the Steam workshop, but because I don't speak or write Chinese, it's very difficult to find what they make sometimes. But this looked awesome, and this gave me a great idea for like a modernized town centre. So what I decided to do was I've turned it into a procedural object and placed it about where I want it, and then we're just going to work with it. So I'm going to place a couple of medieval buildings around it, maybe that were originally here from the beginning of the town, and there's going to be a few modern shops around the town square as well, and then we're going to focus on giving it good access off the roadway, and I'm going to have real citizens moving through here. This is going to be a key point to get from one of the more busy streets on the other side of the square through to the main road running through. I also use this area in between the art gallery and the square to hide a few things. You can see some paths running through here that run in and through the gallery. They're going to be completely hidden, so they just look like they're going through a door off the road. And also we hide a bit of a shady car park down in here as well, but we'll jump into that in a little bit. In the meantime here, I found these like Italian roofs, and they're just roofs. There's no texture or detail on any of the sides, and these are really handy for just filling in areas behind the buildings on the roadside, and it makes it look very compact, and they really help push our medieval theme for this side of the square. And the last building we put in on this side of the square is this really nice looking church, and I turn this sideways because it sort of fits in a little bit better, and I try and line it up so that it looks like the access is coming off of the square. Then I can use the layers function with procedural objects to hide the Italian roofs in the back, and we can start putting in this little shady car park. Now I was pretty sure I was going to have to put a car park in somewhere, but the idea with putting it in here is it's hidden. This is just going to look like underground parking, and it's going to be 100% functional, but it will not look pretty because you're not going to see it. I haven't bothered making any of it make sense or anything as long as it's functional. The only part of it you will see is there's a little recess between the back of the church and the back of the art gallery, and I'm going to make this look like this is where you drive your car into the park. We'll have some parking gates here and a little toll booth and all the rest of it, and yeah, this looks really cool. And we don't ruin the aesthetics of the city with these horrible looking car parks because we can hide it, which is really great. So once the little parking shed's done, we can carry on detailing up the side of the church here, and I put a few bikes down and some little garden planters, pretty standard stuff. And then as we move towards the front of the church, we get the terrain has pulled up a little bit with some of these buildings, so I use little pottery buildings to hide that glitchy terrain. And then I can wiggle these into position and put a door on the front of them, and this is where the path is going to look like it's going into, that you can see here. So it's just going to look like they're walking into these little buildings. And then I decided to replace the texture on the bottom of the church. It's raised up a little more than it's designed for, and the base looked a little crappy, so I've used one of Lost Gecko's fences here and updated this texture a bit, and this looks really good. Then I chuck a couple of trees down and some scrubby looking bushes, and then we can move on to the front of the square. So like I mentioned earlier, the two things we're looking to do here are work with the shape of the square and make the access really good off the road front here. So I'm using these Chinese stairs, these stone stairs, and sliding these into this little wee recess and shaping them so they fit perfectly with procedural objects. And the rest is just putting retaining walls in the right areas and then putting pedestrian paths up these stairs so we've got citizens walking up and down them. I had to make some sort of access on the other side of the square as well so that I could run the pedestrian path right through and make this a usable area. And what I decided to do on the other side, instead of making everything sort of old school and broken, I've decided to make this stair set really modern, make it look like it's had a major upgrade. There's going to be some glass elevators and a really sort of modern looking glass pergola over the top, and yeah, it's just going to look a lot more contemporary compared to things around it. And this was always going to be what I was going to do with this town, but there was one photo that I've seen recently that's given me more inspiration to include more modern style architecture in the city, and it's this one here. This is a 3D printed bridge that they've installed. I'm pretty sure this is in Amsterdam, it certainly looks like it is. But how cool is that? It's a really cool contrast between how neat that looks and all of the old brick and, you know, imperfection around it. So now I can go through and place the last of the buildings directly around the edge of the square, and these are much more modern on this side of the square. I've used two of the same towers, and these are just a vanilla tower, these little narrow ones with glass, and they look pretty cool. I've raised one up a little bit higher than the other and we use stairs to give it access. And then as this pans around, we can see what we do with the front here as well. We're using the same method as before with the narrow concrete paths. We get the stairs right in place, and you can see here I've also installed an elevator and much more glass and contemporary style architecture. I also put a cool little modern type sculpture down the bottom as well, which looks quite neat. So now's my favourite part, the detailing of the town square, and we put a few little markets in here, some people standing around and little shops, and also you'll start to see some of the citizens moving through here, and this has really brought this to life. This looks really neat now, and some of the things you'll see me add here are lights, shop signs and advertising, just to name a few. But I am really looking forward to seeing this once this whole area is built out with more modern buildings around and heaps of people. There's almost 10,000 people in the town already, so this is just going to look better and better as we go on with the series. I had a very clear picture in my mind with what I wanted to do between the tram track and the canal here, and I wanted to jump on this before the idea got swamped by modern buildings and shops and everything else that I want to do in this area. In particular, I wanted to make this bridge here look really medieval, like it had been here for a long time. So I spent hours doing this, manipulating different props down with procedural objects to create handrails, and I even go as far as pulling a whole prop apart just to get a chain from it. You know, the struggle is real, man, but it's all worth it in the end. It comes out looking really good. So I know that when this is all done, this part of the town, this is going to be pretty much bang in the middle, and the idea with this is to make interesting parts, make parts that are different and eye-catching and, you know, draw you into the area, and this is very much going to be one of those areas. This medieval bridge that we're working on at the moment is only going to be one part of, I guess, what I would call a medieval block. This is going to have a lot of history in it, this block. We're also putting another small watermill in the canal here on the edge of a building near this bridge, and the rest of the buildings on this block are going to be the small little medieval buildings that we've seen in the first couple of episodes, and for whatever reason they have survived down here in the heart of the town. So to finish off the bridge here, you'll see me put down some cobblestone decals on it, and then I use the same brick decal that we see on the Dutch roads up on the sidewalks, just to blend the two in together. And we are going to see the town start to facilitate more car traffic as we go on here. So long story short, we're going to see more intersections, more road markings, and it's generally going to fade away from the pedestrian only areas that we've had up to this point, and it's going to start here with this little bridge. I wanted to create a really old little narrow stone walkway over the canal here and in through this medieval area that we're making, and I figured I'm also going to need some access over the tramway at some point, so I've tried to sort of get two birds with one stone here, and I used the concrete path here initially to mark out where I want the pedestrians to go, and it splits off into two different areas here. It goes over the tram track and gives access to the other side, and also it splits off and goes down towards the tram stop. So I expect this to get very busy in future, but once I get this path in place, I can start manipulating buildings and placing them in around it and making it look like this walkway is sort of meant to be here. And I be sure to squeeze the buildings as closely up to the path as I can, because I want these really old narrow walkways. And we start here by placing in the watermill building, and I've used the same water wheel from Revi that he made me in episode 3 and just attached it so it looks like it's on the side of this building. And I use the modules function again with procedural objects to spin it round so it looks like it's working, and this looks so good, man, right in the middle of town. This watermill here is pretty much the reason why I wanted to have this whole medieval block to start with. So we finish it off with some really old rough looking decals on the ground, some rubble, and the area looks really good when it's done. So guys, that brings us to the end of episode 7. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, hit me with suggestions and all of that. Give the video a thumbs up, and if you don't subscribe, could you consider subscribing? I would love that, and I hope to see you guys on the next episode. Take care of yourselves, guys. Bye.